In this lesson, we add exception handling to our Web API calls. The objectives for this lesson are to take a look at the global exception handling built into ASP.NET, talk about profiles in Visual Studio so you can see how exception handling works differently in development versus production. We're going to set up some custom exception handling, talk about status code handling, and exception logging. When an unhandled exception occurs, ASP.NET returns a 500 status code, the exception message, and a full stack trace. Now, you can and you should override these things that are returned because you don't want this much information going down to the caller. That would probably give them a little too much. So let's go ahead, create an exception, and view this built-in exception handling. Open the product controller, and in the method that is going to return the whole list of data, let's throw a new application exception and just say error. So let's go ahead and just run this. We're not going to do anything else. We're just going to run this to see what it looks like when ASP.NET gives us an error message. So we'll click on this guy, we'll execute, and then what happens is back here in Visual Studio, it says, hey, we've got an unhandled exception. So what do you want to do? Now, we could say, we could actually ignore this condition, but let's go ahead and just click continue here. And now if we take a look at what it gives us back, so this is what would go back to the caller. All of this information. So you see error, that's our message that we said to throw. And then you see the whole stack trace here. Now that's way too much information. The caller doesn't need to know how you designed your system or anything like that. So we want to get rid of this. What we're going to do is create our own exception controller. So we're going to create our own controller that gives us now one place that we can look for all of our exception handling. So we're going to extend and override the built-in ASP.NET exception handling. And by doing this, it's going to keep our program.cs a lot cleaner because we're moving this error handling off to our own controller. So let's go ahead and create this controller now. Right mouse click on the controllers folder. Let's add a new class called error controller. So we'll add that, and then let's add some initial code in here. So you can see it's just like any other controller. It inherits from controller base. We have a route. Now the route here is going to be called production error. And then I'm adding a new attribute called API Explorer settings, ignore API equals true. I don't want this to show up on our Swagger screen. There's no reason, right? This is just an internal type of, redirect for if an error occurs. So we don't want this to show up. But then I have a public IActionResult, production error handler, and then we can do some things in here. So I'm going to set up a string message that I'm going to eventually report back on line 19 where I return a status code of 500 and pass that message. The message is first going to say unknown error, but then I'm going to go out to the HTTP context. I'm going to look at this features collection, and I'm going to get an IException handler feature. And the reason I'm doing this because I want to check to see if I get anything back, and if I do, I should be able to grab the error.message from that. Now that error object on features there would contain a lot of other information. All I really care about at this point is just the message, because this is going to be my production error handler. Now, let's go ahead and turn this on by going into program.cs. And right before, down here, right before the use authorization is where you're going to tie this in. So we're going to do app.useExceptionHandler, and we're now going to give it that route. So this registers with ASP.NET that this is our error handling route. We're overriding the one that they have. Let's go ahead and now give this a try. So again, we'll click on our get here. We'll execute this. Go ahead and click continue. We want it to go ahead and throw the application exception. And now if we look down here, look at our error body. Isn't that nice? We're still getting the 500, but now the response body, all that's going back to the user is our message. And that's what we really want. Now I called that our production error, but what we want to do now is set up for both development and production exception handling. Let's take a look at how we do that. Go back to program.cs, and where you had this one line of code, we're going to now switch it to an if statement. One of the great things that we can get is the environment, and we can check whether we're in development or we're in production. In development means I'm running within Visual Studio here. I'm running in debug mode. What we want to do is create a different route for our error handling called development error. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to our error controller here, and we're going to add another route. So you can see the route here is /development error. Again, turn off the ignore API. We don't want any APIs to be generated into Swagger. Public IActionResult development error handler. And now I'm still going to get the same features, but look at now, I'm grabbing a lot more information from that error object than I was before, because I want to build up more information into my message, because as a developer, I want to see all of that information. But when it goes to production, I don't want my caller to see it. So let's go ahead and run this. And since I'm obviously running within Visual Studio, it's running in development mode. Let's get the error here. Let's throw it. Let's continue. And now, there we go. We're right back to what we had before. So basically what I've done is I've duplicated what ASP.NET was doing internally, but I've now got my own two different routes. Now, obviously, part of our job as a developer is to test things when we're in development, of course, but we also want to test what is this thing going to look like and how is it going to run when we're in production. Well, we can do that by setting up different profiles within Visual Studio. Let's take a look. So up here, when we click on this little button to run, these are our different profiles. We're running the AdventureWorks API here in the debug local mode. We can run under IIS Express or WSL, whatever. And how do we control that? Well, we go to the properties launch settings.json. So you can see the different profiles here. I'm going to take this profile, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it right back in, but then I need to change the property name to production. Let's then take production and put this down here into this properties value, ASP.NET Core _ environment, and we'll change it to production. So as long as this ASP.NET Core _ environment variable doesn't say development, then guess what? In here in our program.cs on line 53 is development will be false. So now that we've done that, make sure you save the launch settings.json. You have to save that file, and then look at this. It will show up here underneath our little run button. And if we change to this and we now run, we're now running in that production mode. Now Swagger does not run in production mode. So that means you have to test this out just like you're a regular caller, and you're going to make a call to that API/product. Okay, let's go ahead and click continue here. And now look at what we get back. Error. And that's exactly what a caller then would get. And, feel free to change that, make, whatever other words you want to put around it. That's fine. Okay, but you get the idea that we're changing from one environment to the other. Let's now find out what happens if the user tries to call an API that doesn't exist in our system. That's a 404, right? So let's see what happens right now with default error handling. So what happens if we just run the application and an API doesn't exist? Well, actually, we already saw it. It's because Swagger doesn't exist in production mode. This is what we get. We get HTML coming back. And we could test this out and try just calling something that we know doesn't exist. So we don't want to get the HTML coming back. We want to actually put back our own error message. So what we're going to do is come back over here. I'm going to go to program. I want to just show you something real quickly. One thing we can do is we can say use status code pages, just like that. And now when we run this now just returns an error message, status code 404 not found. Real simple. And that's perfectly fine. You can do that if you want. If you want a little more control over it, go back to your error controller class, and let's go ahead and add yet another route here. So we're going to add a route /status code handler, and then in these little curly braces, code::int. So we're going to map that up to that particular parameter. Public IActionResult status code handler. And now inside of here, I'm going to create a return value called RET, so it's IActionResult. We'll set the message equal to code is not handled, because we're not handling a code if we can't find it, and we're going to do a little switch statement down here. So I've got this switch on the code and I'm handling just 404 right now. Okay, we'll add more as we go on. But if I get that 404, I kind of want to put my own message, API route was not found, and then some message, and then I'll return a status code 404. Now, what other stuff should I have in there? Well, one of the things I can do on this re-execute features that you see on line 15 is I can grab, it's not an error now, I can grab the original path base, the original path, the original query string, combine all of those into the message, and then that's what I can pass back to the caller. So all that gets then returned. Now, in order to do this, we go back to our program.cs and we change this use status code pages to this app.use status code pages with re-execute / status code handler / 0. The 0 is the code that ASP.NET is going to pass to us. So now let's run this. And there we go. There is now our message. So I'm not just telling them a 404 not found, I'm actually telling them what they were trying to access. So I think a little bit better message back to the caller. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, because this may happen to you. Notice I forgot to put in that API Explorer's ignore API equals true, right? So if we take this out of production mode and we go back to development mode and we don't have that in there, I want to show you what happens. Okay, we get a failed to load API definition. So very important on your error routes here to make sure that you put that back in. And there we are. Everything's good. So just wanted to remind you of that. I've had that happen where I forgot that. So I kind of wanted to show you what the error was so that if it ever happens to you, just know that you may need to ignore that API. Now, you remember the logging of the informational messages that we had in the last lesson? Well, what would be nice is if we got exception messages in a different file. Let's take a look at how to do that. Go back to program.cs and let's modify this logging to the rolling file a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm still doing the rolling interval of a day, but I've added on a third parameter restricted to minimum level. So I only want to log events from information up, right? So that would be the information, the error, the critical, all of that. So it's still going to log errors. I'm also now going to change the file name there to infolog.txt. And the reason why is because now I'm going to add another lc.write2. And it's still going to do the rolling interval of a day. But now I'm adding on the third one that says only record errors and above. Okay, so it restricts to a minimum level. There is no way to say minimum and maximum level. So unfortunately, we're still going to get everything in the information log, but we'll now at least kind of break things out a little bit. So I'm going to go over here to the logs folder. I'm going to delete any logs that I have there now. Let's go ahead and run this. Let's click on this, which will still generate our error, and we'll continue. Once that's done, let's now go look underneath our logs folder. Now you'll see the info log with everything, including the error. But under the error log, we just simply see the error now. So now that we've seen the catch-all for unhandled exceptions, we really don't want to have unhandled exceptions. So really you're going to start throwing in your try and your catch blocks now for everything. And let's take a look at how we can log exceptions in our catch block. Open up the product controller and let's add another read-only variable here. And if you hover over this, it should actually tell you that it can fix up the code for you and it'll insert the iLogger. And it can then write the code that takes the logger and puts it into the underscore logger. Once we have that, we need to modify our get method a little bit now. So down here, we're going to modify this code. I'm not going to go ahead and write literally everything. I'm going to go ahead and just bring in the new thing. I'll go ahead and bring in all this new code here, and then we'll walk through it. So here's what we've got now. I've got an HTTP GET. We got the response types of 200, 404, and now the 500. It's still an action result. It's going to return a return value, still the list of products, but I've added a string message equals no products are available. Then I've wrapped all of the code here within a try catch. So in the try, I'm going to go ahead and throw the application error just like I did before, and then I've got the same type of code, right? Where try to do the list, check the status, and then let's take a look at the catch block. Down here in the catch block, I'm going to reset the message to error in productcontroller.get. So I'm specifying where the error is occurring, getting the message, getting the source. You can get the stack trace there if you want. Then I can do the underscore logger.log error, passing in the exception, passing on a message, which is the replaceable, comma, the message that I want to put into that replaceable value in the second parameter. Then I can do RET equals status codes dot status 500 internal server error. And what I return to the caller is a new application exception. I'm not showing them the exception that I got because I've already logged that to my file. What I want to report back to them is error in product API. Please contact the system administrator or something like that. So there we go. Let's now run this. Let's click on the product. Let's try it out and execute. And now look at this. Now down here, we get the 500 back. We get this problem JSON object that has our message, error in product API. Please contact the system administrator. But there's none of the other stuff there, right? We don't want to show them any data. We don't want them to show them the inner exception. We don't want to show them the stack trace. They don't need to know about that. All they need to know is a message that tells them what to do. In this lesson, we talked about how you should be in control of the exceptions in your MVC application. You're going to create your own error controller to handle those exceptions that are global in nature, the unhandled ones. Hopefully you don't have any unhandled ones. Once you have that error controller, you can add methods to handle specific status codes, specific profiles, and we talked about how to log exceptions to a separate file. Coming up next, create a base controller class to reduce duplicate code.